Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek. I'm a Ukrainian by blood, a philosopher, historian. I write on American history, especially Thomas Jefferson, and written on Greek ethics, all sorts of things, Sigmund Freud, psychoanalysis, um, critical thinking, published novels, and I published in all over 70 books. And I've turned my attention to recently the Ukrainian history and special attention to the events that are going on these days, the Ukrainian war. Um, I started a book after finishing an 800 page book on the history of Ukraine titled Ukraine, the Deep Roots of a Young Nation. I've begun a book titled Putin's Obsession with Ukraine. And the motivation for that is I'm always quite interested with my study of psychoanalysis and pathological figures. And Putin, of course, fits the bill. He's a poster boy for certain pathological figures, for authoritarian figures, as today's Russian president. So I've been doing a lot of work. I have a chapter on a psychobiography of Putin, where I psychoanalyze him and discuss that. I have a chapter that I just finished today, rough draft, on Putin's what I call political philosophy. Not that he has one, because he's not an ideologue, he's not a political philosopher, but he has a rough understanding of who he is as a ruler and where he wants to go. Like I said, he's not an ideologist, but I think he thinks he has developed in from someone who had rough sympathies with westernizing and democratizing Russia when he came to the office in 1999 as prime minister, and then was elected president early in 2000. And with being snubbed by the West, at one point he even asked to be talked to Bill Clinton, I think it was, or was it Bush, about the possibility of integration in NATO. He was interested in integrating in NATO. And now he's become a NATO hater, an anti Western thinker, an isolationist, a conservativist, and he's a scary figure. And what bothers me when I follow the events, especially, and this is what I want to talk about today, the more recent events in leading up to these quote unquote discussions that are supposed to happen between Trump and Putin. And what bothers me especially is the events of yesterday when Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth came out and spilled the beans, as it were, talked about what Trump's plan for peace is. And I want to go through that speech and make some comments as I go along. I'm not going to read all parts of it, but just the most relevant parts of it. This is in Brussels, Belgium. And he says, "We are, as you said, Mr. Secretary, at a critical moment. As the war approaches its third anniversary, our message is clear. The bloodshed must stop and this war must end." I want to stop there. Trump's always said that it needs to stop. Why does it need to stop? Of course, wars should not happen. But why does this particular war need to stop? And why is Trump so insistent that it stop? I mean, it bothers me because I think he is in some measure abundantly unfamiliar of the long history between Ukraine and Russia that goes back at least to 1648, the Bogdan Khmelnytsky, and then 1654 with the agreement between Russia and Khmelnytsky in the Perpetual agreement, right, where Ukraine signed a treaty with Russia at the same time. And Putin and other Russians make much of this treaty, that this was sort of an admission that they're one people, that Ukraine is really little Russia, Malorussia, and, you know, why is Trump so insistent that the war must end? Well, his answer always is that hundreds of thousands of people have died. Fair enough answer. We don't need needless bloodshed. But he's also talking about a lasting peace. Hastily ending the war when there's not a just peace is not a lasting peace. What Trump doesn't talk about is abduction of Ukrainian children dragged into Russia to be educated on Russian propaganda, into the Russian war machine, growing up to be soldiers that can fight against perhaps their own parents. Um, Bombing of Ukrainian cities, obliteration like Bucha, where men had their hands tied behind their back, blindfolded at times, and a bullet was shot in the neck. They were exterminated. Women were raped. Uh, there is devastation, war crimes. Where's any mention of this by Trump? Has he gone to see Ukraine? Right? Biden did. He went down to visit, right? And that's the thing. When there was all talk about war crimes, Bucha, and everything else, representatives of the Biden administration went down to examine for themselves to see the devastation. Putin is not Trump views this as come on, Jeff, as get up here, as a business deal between equal partners. And he wants to get for the United States what he can get. Is that right? I mean, he mentioned before rare minerals. And I thought, well, that's pretty clever because that's something Ukraine has. And many of the rare minerals are in the eastern part in the Donbass area, the part conveniently owned by Russia these days, much of which is owned by Russia. And that seemed to be a fair deal. It seemed to me what might Trump have done at the time is say, okay, you want to give us these rare minerals so we can get into the 21st century and make batteries and things like that. That's a great idea, right? But the way Trump phrases this these days, we've been doing it. We want something back. We want our money back. There's no subtlety. He's one of the most unsubtle people. It's very dangerous to go in bargaining with a murderer, a rapist, a criminal, as if he hasn't done anything wrong. And then he has the audacity to say, yeah, we had a good conversation. I get along with him. I sort of like him, and we understand each other. That seems to tell me something about the way Trump thinks. Is he just as much of a thug? Does he share the same blemishes and faults, peccancies of Putin? Does he have such low regard for human life? Again, he talks about the casualties of war, the soldiers dying. He doesn't talk about the atrocities in Ukraine. Never mentions that when he talks about dealings. How do you deal with a criminal? Why do you deal with a criminal? What sort of message does this send to other nations? And by virtue of the fact that you're willing to negotiate with this guy, right, when he's at his weakest state, it's doing exactly what Putin in Russia wants to happen. They want to see division among NATO. The only success that the only chance it has for success is that if NATO remained in the European countries remain united against Russian atrocities, Russian aggression. And this is a major breakup of NATO, right? All right, let's go. So this whole insistence that the war must end, is this going to be a lasting peace? It's not. In 2023, Putin came out to Belarusians and others in a large document that, after Putin takes Ukraine, Belarus is next, and they want to annex it by 2013. He's got a plan to get back the nation states of former Soviet Union and perhaps more. That's his goal. And he's a militarist. He's not a president. Early on, he was a president that cared somewhat about the Russian economy. He doesn't care anymore. This is a militocracy. It's a government that runs on military conquest. The economy is run by the military machine, right? He's a titanolatry, someone who is intoxicated by power. Right? He said when in his book First Person, his government-sanctioned autobiography, I should say, he mentions how he found that he was ensorcelled by the discovery that one person can have such power over other people, life and death. He goes, I found that amusing. Certain sentiments like that tell us everything about a person. And I'll say more about, my psychoanalysis of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin in another time. Why does it have to end immediately? If he doesn't understand about the history of the tension between the two peoples, a hasty war could be trouble, could lead to World War III. I think, as others have suggested, that Putin, that not Putin, but Trump is eyeing for a Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah, I'm Donald Trump. I ended the war in Ukraine. I came in and I negotiated with Putin. We left Zelensky out of the mix, right? Why should he have any say in the direction of his own country? And that's a dangerous thing as well. So it goes on. President Trump has been clear with the American people and with many of your leaders that stopping the fighting and reaching an enduring peace is top priority. Stopping the fighting in an unjust treaty, one that unfairly gives rewards back to criminals, is not going to lead to enduring peace. Putin has other things in mind. Um, He'll go back for the Balkan states, he might go for Poland. It's a matter of time. He's a very patient person. If he lives long enough, he'll aim to do all those things. Anyways, so he wants to end the war by diplomacy. He says, we will only end this devastating war, establish a durable peace by coupling Allied strength with a realistic assessment of the battlefield. One of the interesting things is what Trump always says is what Putin says, power. Right? I want to show everybody, um, how powerful a person I really am. So Trump is coming in through his defense secretary, Hegseth, and just coming out and saying, you know what, this is the way it's going to be, right? And I'll get into some of the other things that Hegseth said as well. So it says a durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0, the other two Minsk agreements, right, between Ukraine and Russia were violated, mightily by Russia at the time. Putin didn't care. Putin has a history of not caring about what he says, of not adhering to his word. Oaths and treaties mean zero to him. Trump apparently doesn't know that. Either that or Trump agrees with him that this is fine. Okay. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. So what is he saying here? Is that NATO membership, at least for the nonce, is not reasonable? Or is he saying that as part of any future scenario, Ukraine is a part of NATO? Since when does the United States have the right to speak on behalf of a sovereign nation in terms of what it can and can't do? If Hegseth is really trying to say that if it tries to, we're just going to block membership and won't happen. Okay. I still don't like that. This is an abuse of power. I looked at stats in terms of how the American people feel about the war, and there was a split in quarters. 28% or so thought that the United States has, extended itself too freely, given too much in the war. Some 24% thought that it hasn't given enough. Some 25% or so said that what we've given in terms of wealth and military assistance is about right. And a good 23 or so percent said, I don't know. Typical of American people. I don't know, right? But if you follow that, it's only 28% of people think like Trump, that we've given way too much. And we've got, 50% or so of the people think that we've given just the right amount or not enough. So is Trump speaking on behalf of the American people with saying we're going to block any bid to NATO, that the war must come to an end and we're going to do it our way? Okay, he says any security guarantee, continues Hegseth, must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. Wants America out of there, right? Uh, and they should not be covered, and he talks about not be covered under Article 5, in other words, encroachment or violation. Say Russian attacking one of the NATO members means a war against all of NATO. Trump, through his Secretary of War, saying, nope, if that happens, the United States is not getting involved. We've already given enough. This scares the hell out of me because we are telling our partners and our friends for many, many decades that we don't give a shit about your security. We've already done our part. We're not going to do any more. So it plays right into Putin's hands, and he's smiling like Lucifer himself, rubbing his hands and smiling. This is exactly what I've wanted. You're giving me, prior to any sort of negotiation, just what I'm asking for. No NATO, right? If I go ahead and attack some other part of Ukraine, you're not going to get involved. It's got to be Europe's problem, right? And scary for him to, prior to negotiations, to make these things abundantly clear to the Russians. Now, one may say, well, perhaps he's speaking bullshit and he doesn't really mean what he's saying. He's just spilling the beans and he doesn't mean to back it up. I doubt that that's true. But if that's the case, keep quiet and say nothing, right? To further enable, you split your infinitive head, Seth. Uh, Effective diplomacy drive down energy prices that fund the war machine. President Trump is unleashing American energy production, encouraging other nations to do the same. Let's pump our oil and pump our oil and pump our oil to reduce the price of oil and put pressure on Russia, um, lower energy prices and so forth. Uh, Now he says, in terms of NATO, it says as part of this, Europe must provide the overwhelming share of future lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine. The United States is done providing the lion's share of weaponry and financial aid to Ukraine. It's all falling on the lap of Europe. Now, I said before, I don't have a problem with Trump discussing and asking persuasively for European nations to do their part. But coming in here in the manner in which he makes his claim, this is sort of like blackmailing. He keeps making the comment, there's an ocean between us. Didn't you people in Europe see that? There's no ocean between you and Russia. If they attack anybody, they're going to attack Ukraine, Poland, the Baltics, Finland. They're not going to attack us. There's no ocean between us. What sort of sophomoric, childish claim is that to state to your partners, your allies, and your friends? He's done, since he's come into the presidency, he's done rather immediately a fantastic job of pissing everyone off. Canadians, it's going to be our 51st state. The Gulf of America, we're going to buy Greenland, and so forth and so on. We can go on with the sort of outlandish claims. So, I'm not saying everything he says is outlandish, but he does everything and speaks always in such a way to piss people off. All right. He calls on the members of NATO to spend more on defense than 2%, right? It's not enough. He asked you to do 5%. Is that going to happen? I doubt that that's going to happen in most nations. But nonetheless, I don't have a problem with him stating that. State it subtly, not unsubtly. And he talks about, Hegseth says, we're going to have peace through strength. Sort of Reaganist thing. But I just want to underscore this notion that Trump and his people always talk about a position of strength. That is how you have to deal with Putin, because that's all he knows. But nonetheless, to make it an express part of your policy, it sort of bothers me. I'd rather say, look, talk about justice here. Trump never talks about justice. There is something that happened. What Putin did is just wrong. It's morally inexcusable. And there needs to be punishment. That's not part of the equation. Here, this is a business transaction for him. He doesn't care about the women raped, the children stolen from the country, the innocent people killed, the devastation to the cities. He never makes mention of that, as far as I know. It's a business transaction. What can we get out of this to advance our own interests? And I understand war, especially recently, is more about economic considerations, and I get that. Right? We don't involve ourselves, for example, in skirmishes in certain parts of Africa or certain parts of Asia if there is no commercial investment with respect to us and all sorts of things. If there's something to get out of it, we'll be involved. And I understand that that happens. I'm not exactly happy with that, but here it seems to me your friends, NATO, Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all. Trump backs away from that, right? How are European nations going to view the West? I mean, America, after what he said. And if he continues to pursue this bullying tactic, he's going to bully foes and friends. He seems more comfortable in discussions with Putin than he does with European leaders at this point. All right. Talks about Sweden, committing 1.2 billion in ammunition. Poland spending 5% of its GDP, and so forth. More must be done, and I don't think that there's anything else to say here that I haven't already said. But what scares me is this U.S. bullying tactic and this whole notion that we're just going to bulldoze our way in our foreign policy. And if it angers our friends, that's fine. If it angers our enemies, that's fine. We're just going to do things Trump's way. This is not a democracy anymore. This is an autocracy as well. America is not far removed from where Russia is. And I say that with some reservations, of course, but we have a president. And how did we get here? How did we get to a point where Trump could be elected president of the United States? Not by much, but still elected. Plato, in his Republic, book 8 of his Republic, a wonderful book. I taught this on many occasions throughout my 30 plus years of teaching philosophy and history, especially philosophy, mentions sort of degenerative conditions when you go from a genuine monarchy and you degenerate all the way down through oligarchy, and then you get to democracy, which is sort of a mob rule of the people. And Plato writes of democracy where father and son turns against father, and all people think that they can rule the polis, the city state, as well as any other person. All consider themselves radically equal, not in a sort of Thomas Jefferson sense, where all are morally equal before the law, but in the sense that I have equal capacities, or perhaps I'm just as good as you, if not better than you, and I should be ruling. And everybody thinks this way. And he talks of the Democrat as someone who wears this cloak. It's funny, he does this cloak. Well, imagine a cloak with all sorts of bright colors on it, and the Democrat walks around the city, and he's, proudly wearing this cloak and walking around as if he's the center of attention. If you think about it today, what this would be like is someone be walking around looking much the part of the fool. But imagine everybody in a city doing that, playing the part of a fool. And that's what Plato has in mind. What happens, Plato says, I'm not going to go into particulars, is that the chaos ensues. And through this chaos, what happens is someone slips through the cracks, the tyrant, and he makes certain promises to the people to end the chaos and so forth. And at some points, he stopped living up to the promises, and he gains control of the city. And the city degenerates. He has complete control over all the people and all the parts of the city. That's how you get autocracy. That's how you get a dictatorship, according to Plato. I'm not saying Plato's views are perfectly relevant or map on to reality today. They don't, but nonetheless, it's just an interesting observation he makes that how out of this anything goes sort of democracy, we get tyranny forms. I think something like that has been going on here under the Biden administration. I'm not necessarily blaming Biden, but I think this was in large part caused by COVID and the unrest people felt by sitting at home, not being able to go out and do things, wearing masks everywhere you go. And there was a great need for people, not just the United States, but in the United States and elsewhere, to find some sort of expression, be a part of something, to find meaning in life. And there came to be something like what Plato, early on when Biden got elected. And I think this really happened. There was a sort of environment of American wokeism where anything goes. You can say whatever you want. You don't pay attention, don't care about authority. Uh, uh, get rid of all the police departments and everything. It was just a sort of random, chaotic milieu. And that led to Trump. The sort of rampant wokeism that occurred early in Biden's presidency, the George Floyd episode, things like that, um, gave rise to an opposite. Newton says to every reaction, there's always opposed and equal reaction, or the mutual bodies upon each other are always equal, directed to contrary parts. In other words, for every action, there's a reaction. And this, I think, plays out in politics as well. And we went from this one part of the pendulum of free, chaotic sort of democracy where anything goes, no respect for authority, police, and so forth. Let's get rid of them, beat up the policemen, get rid of fire the policemen. We don't need order. Gang up, loot stores, all the stuff that was going on in Oregon we know about. I don't have to repeat it. There became a reaction where, and this became the impetus for Trump, what gave Trump a lot of appeal, that he's going to represent order. In fact, he represents order to such an extent that he controls all aspects. And what frightens me, he's a tyrant. He's not much different from Putin, except that he doesn't put to death opposition leaders or people who disagree with him, or people who make fun of him, right? Like Navalny, opposition leader. And a number of people in my new book, I catalog a number of instances of people dying under suspicious circumstances. There was another person last week, I think, or it was early this week, who fell out of a window, right? Who spoke up against Trump or something, and he had his apartment searched. And apparently, while they were searching in one room, and he fell out of the window in the other room. Amazing how people just seem to fall out of windows quite often in Russia. We don't do that here. I'm not saying Trump doesn't do that, but we're not far from that, it seems to me. It's sort of scary, right? When we elect someone a leader and let him do whatever he wants, and the scary thing for me with him as president, what he's doing in Ukraine scares the hell out of me. He just says and does what he wants to do, and then his followers, he's God. Let's follow whatever he says is right. Most of the people I know who are big Trumpists, and most of the people I know are Trump followers, follow whatever he says on every issue. Whatever he says on an issue is the correct thing on that issue. Where's the independent thinking? And that's a sad state of affairs for a robust democracy when there's no independent thinking, there's no collision of ideas. It's not welcome. We go from anything goes, radical wokeism, Platonic democracy, demokratia in Greek, to a sort of the radical conservatism, to the militocracy, I think, or if you want, titanocracy that Trump leads. And I think we need to get away from that. I think, in some sense, if this keeps up with Trump, the only solution is impeachment. Um, and I say that because I think you need to do your homework, Donald Trump. You can't just come in there with a plan, let's going to end the war. Putin, as anybody who knows him, knows he's just going to rebuild. The factories are going to go, he's going to start making more bullets and bombs, more tanks, more ammunition, and then 5 years down the road, or 10, if he's not still alive, they're going to come back into Ukraine. They're going to go after Belarus. He has a history of that. He said he wanted to do that, right, in 2023. And it scares the holy hell out of me that we have a president of the United States who's not doing his homework, wants to come in and just think ending the war is going to be a good thing, even if it's an unjust peace. That's what's missing from this equation. I can't underscore it enough. Justice, one of the hallmarks of liberal democracies, why our founding fathers in the United States went to war, right? I'm not saying all of them. People like Thomas Jefferson, and even George Washington, a sense of justice, that they were fighting. Jefferson thought we're fighting for the robust concept of liberty for all people to lead their lives the way they wish to do, right? We are telling another country that you can't even pursue NATO. Don't even think about it. It's not going to happen, right? And that's all Ukrainians are fighting for, to live a life like we live in, we have the capacity to live in America. We need to get involved more in our democracy. We need to oversee our leaders much more robustly than we do. And then when they're out of line, like Trump has been since he's come into office, a bull in a china shop, we need to watch him very carefully. And if there are too many missteps, get him out of office. So I think, as I said, I'm bothered by what the Secretary of War has said concerning the Ukraine policy. It shows a callous disregard for a study of Russian and Ukrainian history and the relations over the centuries. And it's a policy, it seems to be, not only doomed not to lead to a lasting peace, but it might just be the catalyst for World War III. I'm going to end on that note. If you enjoyed this video, please like. I will do more videos in the future on Ukraine, and I want to do videos on the history of Ukraine very early on, from Kiev all the way into the 20th century. I don't just want to talk about the Ukrainian war. I do so because I feel sort of obligated to do so. So please, again, like this video, share it, make some comments if you disagree with what I've said. I know there are a lot of Trump supporters here. Please voice your disagreement in the commentary section below and tell me why you disagree. If you agree, I want to know why you agree as well. What makes a robust democracy robust is open and free discussion. Thank you, TTFN. We'll do this on another occasion.